Welcome to Student Connections, where students connect with their community.
Hi, I'm Jacob Wright with Student Connections. Today I'm with Miss Susan Bennett from the Port Huron Museum.
Jacob, thank you for having me here.
Thanks for coming in. Yep. What exhibit are you going to have for the fall?
Well, a few weeks ago, we opened our exhibit called Behind the Barrel, which is a story of Prohibition in the Blue Water area from 1920 through 1933. And as you can imagine, this area is very, very rich in heritage with Prohibition because of our proximity to Canada.
All right, so what is the Prohibition exhibit going to have in it?
Well, we've got everything from an old bathtub and a recipe for bathtub gin to a 1928 Ford Model A, which was used to transport liquor, to a fireside chat with FDR. We've tried to cover it all.
Well, that's amazing. How often does the museum change exhibits?
Well, we usually have 3 or 4 a year, depending on the year, and this is our third this year. But what's interesting about our exhibits lately is instead of renting them from a major exhibit manufacturer, we actually have a very talented staff that loves to put it together. So from the minute we have the idea to we have a logo developed locally for us, and we do all the research, and all the building is done right there in the museum. So this is one of the very best we've ever done. Lots of stories about Prohibition, and all put in context of the 1920s.
All right, so how does the museum decide on what their exhibit's going to be?
Well, sometimes, like last year, we had the storm of 1913, and that was a centennial, and you don't have centennials very often about a Great Lakes storm. In this case, 2 of our employees were in Las Vegas, and they went to the Mob Connection Museum, and they came back and said, we've got to do Prohibition the next fall. So that's exactly how this one started.
Wow, that's great. How do you find the information regarding
Well,
each?
we get with lots of different things. We Google it like everybody else. We see what kind of stories we can muster up from inside the community. In fact, this one, back in May, we had a community roundtable event where people could come and tell us their family stories of Prohibition or what they knew about it at the time. Since it was 1933, there's still some of these people alive that can tell the stories of what happened. So we put all of those together, and then we look at what we've got in artifacts and such, and we put together the best stories we can from the information we have. We also do a lot of research through books. We've got a couple authors that are going to come that helped us put together the exhibit in a context, but also will come and talk about their specific subject at our weekly programs for the public.
That's really great. Well, we're going to be right back here after the break.
According to the National Crime Victimization Survey, nearly 2/3 of sexual assaults occur at night. However, this number can be reduced by learning some easy-to-follow nighttime safety tips. Keep a cell phone, flashlight, and some form of ID on you at all times, especially at night, but don't carry a lot of money or valuables. If you're walking or running, plan your route and let others know where you're going. Try your best not to go out alone. Avoid unpopulated or poorly lit areas. If you feel like you're being followed, find a well-populated area or go into a public building. Park in a well-lit area. If you notice any suspicious activity, call the police and find a safe place immediately. By following these rules, your nighttime travels can be safe and enjoyable.
Welcome back to Student Connections. Now, in the past, what exhibits flourished the most?
It's kind of hard to say because we think that the best exhibit is the next one. But I think that a year ago we did the Storm of 1913, which was a centennial event, and it represented the greatest Great Lakes disaster ever, which 100 years ago there was a 4-day storm in November that killed 250 people, most of them in Lake Huron, because it was truly a white hurricane. And that was a perfect combination of science, history, and local lore. And we had almost 15,000 people come through the museum to see that in a 4-month period. So we were pretty happy about that. Behind the Barrel has started out with a bang. And I think this too will be a very, very good one for us.
Do you have any personal favorites?
I was really involved in 1913. It took us 18 months to plan it. I had read the book years ago before I was ever in the museum business, and we made some great, great friends. The city of Goderich in Ontario actually is a sister city to us is in regard to the storm, and we shared a lot of resources. We went to a lot of each other's meetings and did a lot of the same things. They used our logo for their celebration, and they actually won the province-wide history prize for the province of Ontario because of their work for 1913, and that collaboration was terrific.
That's really
I
great.
still see them today, some of those people.
Wow.
Yeah.
So why is the center called the Carnegie Center?
The Carnegie Center is named after Andrew Carnegie, who was an industrialist. If you've ever seen the documentary about the men who built America, Andrew Carnegie was one of them. And back in the early part of the century, he gave money to build libraries. And this Carnegie Library, which there were 1,500 of them across the country, but this was actually only the fourth one built. So when you go into our wonderful Carnegie Center, it is a 1904 library. It's got all the great woodwork. It's got a Tiffany ceiling in one of the rotundas, and it's just a grand, grand old building. And it was a library until 1970, when the Port Huron Library, St. Clair County Library, moved to its then new digs right by the city building. And at that point, it turned into a museum.
Wow, it's amazing. What's the importance of the Huron Lightships?
Well, the Huron Lightship actually is a part of our heritage. It was on duty until 1970. And on duty meant for a lightship that they were often put in places where it was either too dangerous or ineffectual to build a lighthouse. And just north of the Blue Water Bridge, about 6 miles out into the lake, is a very famous area to freighters and ship captains called Corsica Shoals. And the lightship was out there every year as for most of the year rather, as just a warning to skippers that was a very, very shallow area and they should steer clear of it. So when it was decommissioned, it came back to the city of Port Huron, and a grassroots effort started to keep it in Port Huron. So now it is in Pine Grove Park. It was part of our lives for many, many years. You could hear the old fog signal, B-O. How'd I do? That you could hear from miles and miles around. So it's now in Pine Grove Park, and we just love it.
That's great. Well, we'll be right back with Student Connections right after this.
The American Legion. We're a powerful force for the nation. We pledge ourselves to our veterans, our youth, a strong national defense, and Americanism. These 4 pillars shape our work and what we do for America. We work relentlessly within our 4 pillars of service, and we succeed. We're committed to making sure all veterans receive the benefits they deserve for the sacrifices they've made in service to America. We support and promote citizenship and integrity in America's future leaders. We know what policies, tools, and manpower our military needs to protect this great country. We fight to get these things done. We're patriots through and through. We promote and defend these values every day in communities across the nation. Go to legion.org to find out more about the American Legion's commitment of service to America.
All right, welcome back to Student Connections. So why is the Fort Gratiot Lighthouse significant?
Well, the Fort Gratiot Lighthouse is the oldest lighthouse in Michigan and the second oldest on all of the Great Lakes. So 1829 was a pretty important part of our heritage because so much was carried by ship. There weren't rail was just in its infancy rather, and trucks certainly weren't there, so we had to get our supplies all the way around. There was Fort Gratiot, which now stands just about under the Blue Water Bridge, is where it stood in 1814, 1829. And when they put the lighthouse there, it was an absolute necessity to help ships find their way into the St. Clair River. Because remember, at that time, there wouldn't have been a bridge, there wouldn't have been GPS, there wouldn't have been any of those things. So that lighthouse really is an aid to navigation, which it still is to this day, and it brought people in and out of Lake Huron into St. Clair River.
All right, so what paintings are being sold by the museum?
Well, actually, we just finished a 2-year project with a museum in Saskatchewan. And we have 8 Indian paintings and a few landscapes on top of that. The total number is 15. And the only connection they have to our area is that Emma McMorran brought them back. Let me back up for just a minute. The famous McMorran family, Emma McMorran, married Norman Mackenzie, and he was from Saskatchewan. And unfortunately, as they traveled the world, they brought home all these paintings, and unfortunately, he died a very young death. So she came back to live with her sister and her parents, and she brought these paintings with her. And part of our mission at the Port Huron Museum is to not only take care of an artifact, but to make sure it's in the right place. And these paintings simply weren't in the right place. They were Plains Indians. Some of them were heavily damaged in a fire we had in 1984. And this organization has the largest collection outside of the Port Huron Museum by these famous Canadian artists. So they contacted us 2 years ago, and we started the process. And we had to go get permissions from many different groups, including the McMorran Authority, the McMorran family, and the city of Port Huron has an interest in our collection. And when that was all finally done, we made this deal that they're going home. And they actually have applied for a grant through the federal government of Canada where they repatriate Canadian artifacts back to their home. So hopefully all the approvals have been given. We're just waiting for the actual ship date, which should be sometime in the next 30 days.
Right. Is there any high for how high a painting has been sold for, or no?
These weren't, I mean, we're looking about $25,000 for 15, so they weren't worth a lot.
No.
A couple thousand here or a $500 one there. We did have a painting a few years ago that sold at auction for $80,000. And one of the problems of having a ex-library 110-year-old building is humidity and heat. And we can't control that very well. So if it doesn't directly pertain to our area, then we have an obligation to get it to where it does belong. And we've done that with everything from Yale High School senior pictures from 1930 to trophies that came from Port Huron Central, and we're trying to get those things back to the people where it should be. And these paintings were just another example of that.
Right. Is there a reason why Port Huron is detaching from the Carnegie Center?
Actually, the Carnegie Center is, as I mentioned, a 110-year-old building, and the heating and cooling and the utilities are incredibly high. It's a $35,000 a year electric bill. And the city needs to cut some of their expenditures, and it seemed that the museum was a place they wanted to start. So we're actually in negotiation with them to see what kind of a process we can set up to eventually have the Carnegie Center not be supported by the city of Port Huron.
Is this going to be a positive effect or a negative, you think?
Right now it's a negative because we've got a little bit of a time frame here, the end of June. But I think ultimately it will force us to look at our collection and look at what we want to be when we grow up. You know, when you start a museum in 1970, you take everything, including hundreds of teacups. And that doesn't really tell the story of our area. So we've got an opportunity to look at our collection and maybe cull that down to what's important to the people in the area.
Well, let's hope that really happens. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you.
This was Student Connections. I'm Jacob Wright, M6, your hometown station.